Hello and welcome back to the Will Talk podcast. My name is Georgie Howe. Abby has given me the reins this week. I think she may move to regret this choice, but I have my hands held by the wonderful Gracie Alvin.
Hello, hello. Nice to see you, Georgie, even though I just dropped you off at the airport a day ago.
Canberra Airport, it was such a lovely experience. Much better than Melbourne.
Yeah, it's a pretty swish airport, but you just got to add probably an extra leg onto every journey if you want to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And mentored by the wonderful Matt Deneve.
Hello, it's been a while here since I've been on the pod. I think Tour Down Under was the last time I was chatting with you guys. And in fact, it was you two, I think we were talking at the Hilton Hotel in Adelaide last time. So it's been a while.
Yeah, that's right. Slightly warmer temperatures than what we're all currently experiencing. Got a fair bit to talk about this week. We will dive straight into the racing. We had some fairly intense racing over the weekend with Tour of Britain and the Tour of Catalonia, as well as Dwars Westhoek over in the Belgian Netherlands area. But we'll kick off with the heading up to Britain with Tour of Britain. It was 4 stages spanning across the country, finishing in Glasgow. Stage 1 was a fairly attritional stage. It was a shorter stage, around 83 kilometres, and it started with a 12-kilometre dragging climb. So no doubt the riders were nice and warmed up, ready to go. Back door was pretty much open all day. The riders were dropping off the back. Roads oscillated between the wet and the dry, with riders dodging potholes and getting their eye in for the British roads and those tall hedges. Kim Lacourt of AG Insurance Sudal made her move at about 37 kilometres to go on a nasty climb with a steeper section at the start of about 15%. She powered away with the likes of Anna Henderson of Little Trek and Kristen Faulkner of EF Education Oatly, who attempted to stay with her. The whole climb was about 1.8 k's in length, averaging just under 7%, but Lacourt managed to go away solo and dropped Henderson, who was unable to reconnect with Lacourt, but Faulkner was able to power back on, and the two worked quite well together in that strong cross tailwind, which actually aided them quite well, as well as the course had a mostly false flat downhill towards the finish in Redcar. Evidently, it was much safer in front of the Pello, particularly with those twists and turns. There were some fairly technical descents, particularly a gnarly one that was around negative 25% with a sharp right-hand turn. But all the riders seemed to get through fairly safely. The gap to the breakaway hovered around 20 seconds from about 25 k's to go, with a chasing group consisting of fast finisher Lorena Wiebes, 4 Little Trek riders, plenty of Movistar, including Kat Ferguson, as well as FDJ-Suez with Ali Wollaston there for them, driving the pace. So Movistar came in to help to keep the breakaway in check. FDJ also contributing a rider or two, with Trek finding out quite late that they had missed the boat in helping that. Lacourt was, I think she was the smaller of the two in that long straight finish into the finish line. But in the end, it was Lacourt who stuck it into the big gear, launched her sprint at about 300 metres to go and managed to power away in front of Kristen Faulkner, with Wiebes winning the bunch sprint about 5 seconds behind. Stage 2 took us to the same course that Pfeiffer Georgie has won nationals on a few years running, as well as Kat Ferguson has won on this course as well. It was a very placid neutral zone, very average weather, with the British teams animating the race early. There was a big crash at about 110 kilometres to go, with Kim Lacourt coming down hard. Took her a while to get up, actually. Kristen Faulkner was also caught up in that crash. So with the race leader and second place finisher from the day before, it was not a good way to start the day. There was an early breakaway of Tiffany Keep, Lucy Gadd and Madeline Leach of the British teams. Maddie Leach was dropped through the rollers and throughout the towns, and the breakaway was whittled down to 2. It was then at about 39 k's to go that attacks started to fly from the peloton, started by Jade Wheel of FDJ-Suez, Loretta Hanson of Little Trek, Josie Talbot of Liv Ulula Jaco, and Anna Henderson of Little Trek all had a stab at separating the peloton, with Little Trek really being the instigator there. At about 27 k's to go, there was a huge crash, which caught up Wiebes. Anna Henderson managed to squeeze off the front with Picnic Postinel, with Faulkner driving the chase group back. UAE soon came through to help Faulkner pull back the Little Trek rider and Picnic Postinel rider. Lizzie Digan then fired off an attack on a descent, with Little Trek taking control. Heading into the intermediate sprint, it was Kat Ferguson. When they pulled that breakaway back, they got the bonus seconds ahead of Faulkner and Henderson. Picnic Post-Nell then took control heading into the base of the QOM with clear intent, with Josie Nelson and Charlotte Cool coming in for a pull to set a blistering pace when the 21-year-old Canadian Mara Roldan launched her attack at about 500 metres to go on the QOM. And it was, really excellent. You could see all of the effort she put into it. That attack then saw responses from the bunch, whittling it down to about 15. But there was no pulling back Roldan. She was stomping on the pedals and managed to stay away, with Rhiannon Marcus making a late attempt to bridge. So it was Roldan who took the win ahead of Marcus and Wollaston. Stage 3 was the longest of the tour and proved to be the most hectic. Weather was typical of Northern England, interchangeable and unpredictable. The riders were keen to kick things off with pace injected from the start. The race started to blow apart on the first QOM up Scottsview with about 120 kilometres to go. FDJ-Suez set a very hard pace with Marie Lynette attempting to get off the front. While all of this is happening, Kristen Faulkner, unfortunately, her bad luck continued and had to get a bike change from her teammate Babette van der Wolf. It was a much smaller bike, unfortunately for Kristen. But into the Melrose climb, FDJ wanted to keep the pace on with the race leader having a mechanical and fighting back. Wollaston was always present at the front, behind the likes of Jade Reel and Amber Crack. The peloton continued just to split into multiple groups, and at 93 kilometres to go into the race. 93 kilometres into the race, the riders approached Kelso for the first time, and there was a really big crash on a fast left-hand turn, which saw Mara Roldan, the winner of the stage the day prior, slide out from third wheel, and unfortunately she broke her femur in that crash, with plenty of the peloton coming down, including very audibly in pain Christine Marjarus of SD Works Pro Time. So that was quite upsetting to see. There were 2 FDJ riders and an EF Education Oatly rider that got through, but they sat up to allow for a regroup. It was the intermediate sprints that proved to be hard fought, with Wollaston and Ferguson going for them each time. Wollaston managed to get ahead. And at about 25 kilometres to go up Melrose climb for the second time, it was Cecily Uttrup-Ludwig of Canyon Shrams on the Crypto that took a burner after some work from her teammates. Ferguson and Josie Nelson were able to follow her closely and then forced a breakaway of those 3, plus Wollaston, Caroline Swinkles of UAE Team ADQ, as well as her teammate Eleonora Gasparini. And that group worked really well together until... but unfortunately for Cecily, she was forced to drop out of that group to change her wheel from Shimano Neutral Service. UAE attempted to play some games into the finish in Kelso, but it was Ferguson who managed that sprint on the wet cobbles the best, with Wollaston boxed in and Josie Nelson taking in second. So it was Ferguson, Nelson, and then Wollaston. Then and also as an aside, Kat Ferguson is now the youngest winner in Women's World Tour race history, taking over the title from Francie Koch. So that's a pretty cool title to have for her first Women's World Tour stage win. So into stage 4, Kat Ferguson is in the leader's jersey, only about 3 seconds ahead of Wollaston as they head into Glasgow, 82-kilometre circuit around the city, and it was the intermediate sprints that were hotly contested. Wollaston was able to get the better of Ferguson in those sprints, and heading into the final, they were level on time. So it meant that the race win would come down to the final sprint to the line. And it was Little Trek who attempted to take control of the lead out, but SD Works Pro Time managed to take back control, and it was a sprint seemed of years past between Lorena Wiebes and Charlotte Cool of Team Picnic Post-Nell, with Wiebes taking the win over Cool, and about 2 bike lengths back, Wollaston managed to soak up those bonus seconds and take third, seeing that her take the GC win. And she was very ecstatic as she crossed the line there. So the final standings on GC was Wollaston 1, with Ferguson at 4 seconds and Swinkles at 22 seconds. So very long recap, but yeah, have at it, team. What do we think?
Well, I think it was deserving of a long recap, because for only 4 stages, it was absolutely jam-packed with drama and really good racing. I loved the battle at the end, particularly between Kat Ferguson and Ali Wollaston, and also their whole teams. That both teams did such a good job. And I think, I guess we got to begin with a huge hats off to the youngster Kat Ferguson. I think she's probably the main talking point of this tour. And I felt so heartbroken for her at the end. She interviewed so maturely despite the disappointment coming out of that last stage. But wow, what a talent. She said in a final interview, if you told me that I would have won a stage and been second overall before this tour, I would have been so happy with that. So I can't be disappointed that she was implying that she'd lost the overall on that final stage. So yeah, what a talent, and seems quite mature, was able to handle that pressure and handle the disappointment too, which is actually also a hard thing to do. You could see that emotion in her eyes, but she didn't let that take away from still retaining really good sportsmanship and grace at the end. So yeah, like I love that the sprint finish on the stage 3. To overcome some great sprinters, and Georgie and I were watching the stages together over the weekend. So we had a bit of our own commentary running as well as my partner Kimbers, who loves a bit of couch commentary. So we were having a lot of fun watching the stages. And yeah, that finish was really interesting because of course on paper you'd back Wollaston in that finish, but it was a really hard day. And we all know how hard the stages in Britain can be. They're rolling. There's never a huge amount of vertical meters in any stage generally, but it's like a lot harder climbing than what it looks like on paper because of those grippy roads. So you're so dead at the end of every stage. And I think that's, that took away from Wollaston's sprint, especially on stage 3, and shows really the talent that Kat Ferguson has for such a tough, miserable day and relatively technical finish. So yeah, big kudos to her. And I'm not sure if she ever listens, but I'm very impressed. And I think when you're that age, everything feels super important. And in some ways it is, like everything's important in the moment. But I hope that she can move on from this without ruminating too much on it and know that she actually did so well. She did her best and she's got still so much to build on in the future, and I hope she has some longevity in this sport.
Yeah, she's riding and interviewing and handling herself like a rider that's much older than 19. She's just turned 19 in last month or a month or so ago. It's almost easy to forget that it's her first year in the World Tour team. I think she rode as a stagiaire at the end of last year and had a couple of wins racing as a stagiaire for Movistar, and then has come into the World Tour team this year. And this is her first World Tour win, 3-year contract, and they're giving her lots of opportunity as well. We've seen that they're riding for her, which is exciting. Part of me really hopes that they're not putting too much pressure on her early. She's still so young and got a long career ahead of her if she wants it, and I hope they're giving her the chance to grow and to mature and to learn before putting too much pressure on her. But yeah, either way, very impressive from her. And that stage 3 sprint, on the wet cobbles there coming in the whole day, really, the rain, and Ruby Rose McGannon's crash into the hedge. Like, it was kind of like if you'd asked an AI video program to create a wet stage in the Tour of Britain. It was kind of like perfect, wet and windy and hedgerows and everything. It was just quintessential Tour of Britain nastiness.
Oh yeah, it definitely gave me flashbacks. I think I did it 5 times since the very first time that they began the tour, and I crashed at every single edition at least once. And so now whenever I watch this race, I'm always like excited to see how it goes, but also like cringing, just being like, oh, those poor riders, they're just in for it with the weather and the road conditions, and definitely going to be crashes. So I always feel for anyone that has to front up to that tour, but it is a great opportunity to get results. And while it's a World Tour level still, I think in the past it rightly deserved that. I think it still deserves it, but maybe it shouldn't be World Tour. And this just goes back to a conversation we have, every other podcast of levels of races. And this could be a nice race to drop down to a 1.2.
2 Pro maybe.
Yeah. So, just a level below, I think. But it was great to see that all of the British Conti teams were there because there was enough spaces for them, because a lot of the bigger teams well, yes, some of the bigger teams didn't go. So it was a smallish peloton and good opportunity for developing riders to come along, but also a great opportunity for any rider, but especially the World Tour riders, to get some good runs on the board, and those teams that maybe haven't had as many runs so far. But yeah, I guess the next talking point is Ali Wollaston. She, if anyone was going to overtake Kat with a lot of fans behind her, it was Ali, and I was still really happy to see her get up. Obviously very talented as well, but she had some amazing team support, and I think that probably was the difference between her and Kat. Like, the Movistar team did really well, but the FDJ team is just on a better level there in the way that they can support a winner.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You could see that in stage 3, the way that FDJ were just animating the race tirelessly. You had Amber Crack, then Jad Wheel, then Marie Lynette, and it was almost like they were rotating that, but they always had Ali in the top 3 wheels. So there was clear intent there to make it hard and to take ownership and responsibility for making it hard, with the intent to get some separation and perhaps even get Ali up the road in a small group, because they're confident in her ability to win from a small group there. In the stage 3 sprint, it didn't work out that way. There were some mistakes made by Ali, but I'm sure she'd probably reflect on that and learn, and then was able to back herself in for the next day and shake it off. And you could just see the emotion on the stage of what it meant to her as well. I think this was her first World Tour GC win from memory, so it was a really emotional day for her. And I think possibly because of the team effort that it took to get there, maybe she's probably that type of person that appreciates that a lot, and it also speaks to the culture within FDJ that we've talked about previously as well.
I think looking at the final standings, you get a real sense of just how important bonus seconds are at this race as well. Wollaston wins the race overall by 4 seconds, and the difference is those 4 bonus seconds that she got over Ferguson. And so it doesn't just take a good result one day, it takes consistency across the race, and then particularly on that last day where she wins all 3 of the bonus sprints and then gets up for third in the final sprint. So yeah, and you can't do that without a great team around you getting you in position all those times to get those seconds and be consistent like that. So yeah, great from FDJ-Suez. And I mean, you guys have spoken about in the past about how that team's going this year, but they're just on another level at the moment. And we'll talk about Catalunya in a little bit, but they're just doing a lot of things right. They've got a lot of strong riders doing great things, and that's pretty exciting, I think, because if you look back at the rankings over the last few years, SD Works haven't lost a UCI World Ranking since it started in its current form in 2022, and FDJ is currently ahead. So that's exciting, I think.
Democratized success. This is great. We want. It is really exciting, and there were a lot of teams and riders that came to the fore in Tour of Britain that I was really impressed with. I did feel for the likes of those who had bad luck, such as Mara Roldan, Cecilia Ludwig, who had to drop out of that top group. Kristen Faulkner had an absolute shocker in terms of luck. Like, it just talking to a lot of the riders, it really does come down to having a great team to keep you out of trouble, which Wollaston and Ferguson clearly had. But it all comes down to luck. Like, you could be top 3 wheels, and as we saw with Mara Roldan, and have an absolute stinker of a crash that rules you out completely. So it's definitely a race that has more of a say than others.
I think that was one of the big takeaways for me from the entire race, was just how much it highlighted the ups and downs of pro racing. You got Lacourte winning the first stage, her first race back since Liège, since winning that, which was fantastic. She rode so strongly. The next day she has a crash and injures her coccyx and is in a bad way and ends up leaving the race stage 3. You have Roldan, who wins her stage on stage 2, her breakout victory, super exciting, well won, and then the next day she's out with a broken femur. Kristen Faulkner, she's in the leader's jersey, then she has that horror day that you're talking about. Yeah, just particularly for Roldan, it's like, welcome to the ups and downs, right? It's it can be a brutal sport, it can be a beautiful sport, but it can be a brutal sport as well in the very next moment.
Yeah, for sure. And Roldan, she gave everything for that win. Gracie and I were watching it, and the commentators weren't as favorable to her style as they were Rihanna Marcus, who was trying to chase her down, because Roldan was reminiscent of Annemiek van Vleuten wrestling the bike up the climb, in the sense that she was rocking and rolling. But you could just I almost like that better, because you could see the effort that she was putting in and how much she cared for it, and it was a tough finish as well. So for a 21-year-old to take on the class that she had around her in that race and to win is superb. And yeah, I really hope that she takes solace from that, and it keeps her hungry throughout the recovery of her injury.
Yeah, and it was a good lesson learned from a commentary point of view, because the commentators barely talked about her, and then she ended up winning the stage. I think they were expecting her to be caught. So I think, from an entertainment point of view, as commentators, even if your professional opinion is that she'll probably be caught, I think you still have to, not sit on the fence, but you've got to drum up that excitement and be like, oh, this is really exciting, and really speak up that rider regardless of whether they get caught or not. So I think just, I'm just saying this out of giving a bit of a backstage insight into commentary. And sometimes you, as a commentator, you want to be right. And instead you actually need to you got to get the audience excited. And there's a little bit of a difference there about how you tell that story. And yeah, it was interesting watching, because they were barely talking about that rider. So yeah, I know that I've been in that situation a couple of times, and you feel like you're going to waste energy talking someone up that's probably just going to get caught, but sometimes they don't. So
yeah, definitely a good lesson.
I think for just on Roland's win, exciting win for Picnic Postinel as well. I mean, they haven't had the year that they would have wanted so far. And if you leave aside Giuliano Lodogno's win at the Colombian Nationals earlier this year, this is their first victory of the year. Certainly their first win in Europe, first win in a UCI classified race. So I'm sure they would have hoped to have had more wins on the board by now, but hopefully they can get some momentum going from here as we get into the Giro and the Tour and those races.
Mm. They had a fairly quiet season. They tend to start a bit slower and build in, which is so maybe coming into the Giro and the Tour they'll poke their head above the parapet a little bit more. Cool coming second to Weavers, I think, was a good sign that she's still hungry for that sprint win. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. But I just wanted to touch on on something that some of the riders have brought up around Tour of Britain, because it was quote unquote a bit of a crash fest. Course design. Is there something that the organisation could do differently with the course design? Gracie, you talked about how this is just like an example of just British racing, but is there a way that the courses can be designed better to mitigate these crashes?
Yeah, it's an important question that needs to be asked. I think if there's a high frequency of accidents happening at a particular race, without knowing the actual roads in those areas, someone like Lizzie Deignan would be a good spokesperson, or some of those other British riders could be good spokespeople for this in particular, if they wanted to talk to the Cyclists Alliance or CPA in terms of rider safety. I'm assuming that most of the roads around those areas aren't much better, so I'm not quite sure what could change. And when we look at rider safety, we definitely look at different elements of what makes a course, and I think mostly they're looking in the last few kilometres in terms of what that should look like. Maybe not for the whole course. You're sometimes going to come through narrow lanes or rough shoulders or a few potholes here and there that maybe are unavoidable in a total course design, but maybe they are. So yeah, I don't think I can answer this one exactly, but I think it's worth getting quite a few voices in the room that get to race this race and see exactly what their thoughts are, and then get a few local experts as well and see can be done better in the future if it's an issue. But from my own experience of racing, it's nearly always going to rain at least one stage, and that's going to affect it. And that'll affect it in any country, the rain. We've seen that lots of times. Plenty of crashes happen in the rain. I think in Britain, we have those hedgerows, which makes visibility harder because you can't see around the corners as well. The roads are a little bit narrower. Sometimes there's rougher edges. And so the nature of some of those roads in Britain, I think, just going back to what I was saying before, that it's kind of like that everywhere. So it's quite difficult to find the ideal course there that's safe. So yeah, I don't know. Not sure about that one.
It's a wicked problem.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, all the riders that did come down recover, because there were some nasty ones. And there was a really touching photo of Lizzie Deignan, who actually got off her bike and was kneeling next to Mara Roldan when she had that awful crash. So it's lovely to see the human element when something like that happens.
Can we have a quick chat about Lizzie and the Trek team, because they were probably the most aggressive in the tour. Not surprising, they're like that a lot of the time, but more in the context of the conversation that we had last week, in that, what do they do? How do they win races at the moment? And I guess the consensus was that they need to be on the offensive, which they usually are, and they definitely were here at Britain. And Lizzie was probably one of the most active riders.
Yeah, definitely.
In her last edition as well.
Yeah, it was. There wasn't really a point where there wasn't a Trek rider trying to inject some pace into the peloton. There was like one stage where I think Kristen was off the back. Maybe it was stage 2, and Lizzie was trying to push pace. She actually got a gap, and she turned around and got really frustrated with the bunch behind for not keeping up and rolling the pace through. So they were pretty keen to keep things moving. But yeah, I think they would have wanted more than 4th on GC with Rihanna, given the amount of work that they did.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure like where their riders are in terms of their form, what they're tracking towards with goals, or where they're tracking away from with injuries or illnesses. But Georgie and I were having a bit of a chat when we were watching stage 2, and in that Rihanna Marcus is a big talent that feels a bit wasted, not wasted at Trek, but just wasted in the way that she is focusing her attention, I guess. And she's trying to become a climber or a GC rider, but she's got, in my mind, she's more of an Ellen Van Dyke. And I feel like she needs to lean more into those strengths rather than into the climbing strengths. I think she's doing herself a disservice by trying to be more of a climber type at the moment, where I think she could actually find that better middle ground in races like this. And I think Tour of Britain would have actually been really good for her if she had a bit more muscle mass on her and a bit more strength.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she was so aero as a time trial nerd. I looked at that position and I was like, oh, in my dreams, I just want to look that smooth on a bike. But yeah, if she had so much power behind her, and she is still a good time trialist in her own right, but I feel like her focus on becoming a bit more of a GC rider in those high mountain stages maybe be a bit misplaced, given the talent that we are seeing on those big long climbs. Like, you've got Demi, who's setting over 6 watts per kilo up a 10-minute climb at Itzulia. So unless you can match that, are you, like, how realistic is front group on those climbs? So I wonder, yeah, kind of what we talk about a bit is like making sure the rider makes their strength. So like really focusing on what they're good at. And for Marcus, yeah, those classic style races, those long range solo breakaways, bit of an Ellen Van Dyke character, could have been, yeah, definitely a future for her.
How do you guys think that they'll use Rihanna Marcus for the rest of the season? Do you think they'll go to the Giro or the Tour with her as a helper in the GC, or that she'll be a GC contender for them? Or what do you think they're thinking of based on how she was racing in Britain and the role she was given there?
I'd see it as like a right-hand man to riders like Niamh Fisher-Black and Amanda Spratt. So, yeah, maybe a third card to play, but she's just not quite at that level with the climbing at the moment. So, yeah, I'd love to see her just really leaning into her strengths and being, yeah, just able to be that really versatile domestique rider that could win on, intermediate stages in races.
Yeah, 100%. I think like possibly they might be thinking of her as like a stage hunter in those grand tours, but I don't think that will happen given the severity of these stages now. But yeah, as to echo Gracie's point, I'd love to see her just focus more on that time trial capability, because she is so aero. It is really lovely to watch. Get some more power behind there and she'd be unstoppable. Rania, do you guys have anything else you want to add about Tour of Britain? Anything funny you saw?
Just a note about the length of the race. It's 4 stages, and I think last year was 4 stages as well from memory, but it used to be longer, and I know we've had a few cancellations along the way there, and the race has been up in the air. And I think, Gracie, you made a good point that it probably feels like a lower level race than the World Tour event that it currently is now. But where do we think it's heading in the next few years? Do we think it is going to get back to a longer race that feels a bit more prestigious, or is it is 4 stages where it feels like it needs to be at for the moment?
So it goes to funding, I think. Just follow the money. Because I'd love to see longer.
Look, I'd like to see longer maybe, but I liked the 4 stages this year. It was really entertaining from a viewer point of view. As a rider, they're probably happy that it was just 4 stages because it's pretty brutal to race there. My training stress score was always super high for 5 or 6 stages when I used to race it. It's like just one of those tough weeks that you just get so smashed by. So, maybe some of the riders were quite pleased about that. So from a sustainability point of view too, to keep this race going in the future, keeping it at 4 days is worth coming across the ditch for many teams, but it's also practical on a budgeting point of view, both from a race organization and probably from a team point of view as well. So yeah, I think dropping down to a pro level could actually be helpful, and opening it up to more national teams as well as World Tour teams and pro teams to come and race it. I think that you could get a really nice spread of riders and opportunities for talent development. And then just the way it sits in the calendar as well, having a 5 or 6 stage tour between all of those Spanish races and then the Giro and the Tour, it might be too much now, whereas in the past we didn't have as many tours that were quite big. So I think that it's probably not going to fit in very well until we have even bigger team sizes again, or more pro team level teams to sustain such a full calendar.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I like the point around the national team and smaller teams coming to race as well. Like we saw in this race, there was some really great performances by the likes of Millie Cousins, who was riding for the GB national team. Some other stand-up performances from the UK riders who were riding for their club teams to kind of put themselves in the shop window for the World Tour teams to see. So it's a really important opportunity, and part of the development of the sport as well is to get those riders to test themselves against the World Tour teams and see where they're at. So we get a nice spread of talent across the World Tour, not just purely all coming from Europe. So, I mean, it's the same argument we have for riders coming from Australia as well.
And for a race like the Sun Tour as well, it springs to mind for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is coming back next year. So hopefully we'll see some of that come. Some of those smaller teams get the opportunity there. So maybe 4 days. Maybe I've been I just forget about what it was like on the bike in Britain. 4 days maybe is enough. Perhaps longer actual, in kilometers wise, longer stages, because the first one was only in the 80s.
The last stage too. Yeah,
the last stage as well. So, and then the third stage was an epic at 1:43, and that was the most epic stage. But imagine if we had some longer races before that as well, would have been good. All right, so shall we move on to Tour de Catalunya? So go from the rain in the UK to what looked like sunny Spain. So it was the third edition of the Tour of Catalunya. The start list included FDJ-Suez. They had a climbing squad, which included Demi Vollering and Elise Chabet. Visma Lease Bike was there, along with Movistar and Human Powered Health, and that kind of rounded out the World Tour teams, along with the rest of the start list consisted of the continental teams. First stage was 114 kilometers with about 1,600 meters of climbing. And I'm going to butcher these pronunciations, so I apologize. El Peripeo to Rus. I apologize to anyone listenership who is Spanish speaking. Chabet was able to take out the victory in this stage ahead of Vollering, with Anes and Esteban of Labarol rounding out the podium. The stage was fought between those three on the final climb of the day, with Chabet forging ahead after a late attack, and Vollering was just able to mark San Esteban there and get her teammate the win. Stage 2 was from Baga to Col de Pau, which was a queen stage, and that was won by Vollering over a duo of Visma Lease bike riders, young ones, in Marion Bunal and Femke de Vries. The peloton climbed in the final stages from 770 meters above sea level to over 2,100 meters. And then Demi Vollering was able to attack after a great work by Elise Chabet in the final 11 kilometers. Bunal and de Vries were the only two that were able to go with her, but Bunal was the only one who could actually stick with the Dutch climber, with Vollering surging away in the last kilometer to win the stage and take the overall. Stage 3 was won by FDJ again. So that's 3 out of 3 for FDJ-Suez. After it was won by Lois Adegeist, after a lead out by Demi Vollering. So the stage concluded in Barcelona after a really steep descent from Alt de Begus. Again, apologies. On the run into the line, Vollering repaid the favour of her teammates in leading Adegeist out for a sprint and helping FDJ complete a clean sweep of the race and take the overall GC. The final GC standings was Vollering, followed by Shabby, and then young Bunal took out third place. And one of the other stories from the race was that Vollering was fined 100 Swiss francs for celebrating as a teammate won the final stage because she took her hands off the handlebars, which is a new rule that came into effect this year. Vollering was quoted in saying on Instagram, "Oops, this final finish photo cost me 100 Swiss francs, UCI points, and my 6th place on the stage. But seriously, I won't do it again, or at least I'll try. It's a hard rule to get used to, but I promise I understand the importance of these rules around safety." Discuss.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to take some time for the riders to get used to that rule, and we see even riders of the quality of Vollering are still getting used to it. So I think she'll learn her lesson from that. But it was FDJ-Suez dominance basically, spreading the wins around. I was really excited to see Elise Chabet win on stage 1. Big fan of hers, and she's a rider that doesn't really have the palmares that reflects how good a rider she is. She's such an aggressive rider and such a aggressive, dynamic racer, and has been so good so far this year. So to see her get a win was great, and obviously she benefited from having Vollering in that group, and Vollering put all the pressure on Sant Esteban to chase, which completely fair enough. But great to see Shabby get that win, and big fan of hers. The Queen stage was an interesting one for me. Good to see Brunel up there, obviously. Vollering opened up, I think, half a minute's gap in about 500 metres at the end there when she decided that she'd sort of had enough and wanted to put in the late surge. I'm a little bit surprised that we didn't see more of the bigger GC contenders at this race. I know it was a smaller race, like a 2.1, but that final climb on stage 2, nearly 20 Ks of climbing, finishing at above 2,000 meters of altitude. There's not that many big climbs that the riders get to do throughout the year in preparation for the Giro and for the Tour. And I think I was expecting more of the bigger names to be there. We've talked about how Kopecky hasn't had that many chances on the big climbs ahead of her, big goals at the Tour this year. And, riders like her or other riders are sort of expecting to see a few more of them test themselves. And I know it's early and it's still time for the Tour, and it gets a bit tricky with altitude training and stuff like that, but probably would have liked to see a few more of the bigger names and bigger teams there as well.
It's an interesting point that you make around the altitude training camp, because as you were saying that, I was like, plenty of the riders are at altitude pre-Giro. And I wonder, I think I understand that there is benefit to altitude training, and like there is the rhetoric, like if you're not doing altitude training, you're going to be out the back once the race starts. But I don't think there's better training than racing and testing yourself on those climbs. So yeah, I think you got to weigh up the cost of, is doing this race going to be better for me heading into the Giro, or is it better off I just keep doing those long base Ks at altitude heading into the Giro? So yeah, I would have liked to see more climbers on this list, like more out and out GC threats for the Giro and the Tour. I was surprised at the sparse start list, to be honest. But it was really good to see Chabet able to like cut her teeth at the top end of the race, and I think that's important for her confidence and important for the team culture to kind of repay her for the work that she's done previously in the season. And that work will have to continue heading with Vollering, obviously targeting the Tour win.
I assume FDJ-Suez has got a pretty clear idea of who they're taking to the Tour and who they're taking to the Giro, but I wouldn't want to be making those selections. They've got a lot of very good riders doing a lot of good things at the moment, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of it's been selected already, but they're going to have a good squad at both races, I would suggest.
Just going to the topic of having more riders at these races, or versus altitude, I think maybe some riders are getting told what they should be doing, but I think there's a lot of riders that know what works better for them, and racing while you can't fully replicate that in training, there's also so many benefits to just being on a training camp or just being at home, because it's way less stressful. And after a full spring of travel and stressful racing, and then a couple of tours already, I think there's some riders that just wanted to just simmer down a little bit and just take away some of that pressure, some of that stress, some of the risk of crashing, and just have more of a tranquilo kind of couple of weeks leading into some pretty big goals. And you could say that the Giro and the Tour is probably going to be the biggest goals for a lot of these top riders for the season. So I think it's just that mental approach that is probably actually the main consideration at this point in time in the year. But yeah, like I said, there's going to be a few people in their ear, or like the coaches or the DSs, and also the team staff. They're pretty smoked by this point in time already too, so they don't want to be driving all the way back down to Spain or staying there, or, you know, every team's got a different location for their base, their service course. But, you know, like, everyone's weighing up what the cost benefit is, and not just with money, but with energy and mental energy as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm excited to see what Marion Brunel can do later in the year. Great result for her, obviously, being the last rider to stick with Vollering on that climb. I'm not sure whether she's supposed to be doing the Giro or the Tour, or what's coming up for her, but she's obviously a super talent. She won those 2 stages and the overall 11 year last year, and 20 years old, so she's obviously got a big future ahead of her, and yeah, we might see some more exciting stuff from her this year, I think.
She's booked in to do Tour of Swiss.
Yep.
So that will be a good ride for her. Yeah, I wonder if she'll be in for the Giro, the Tour, to kind of be lieutenant to the likes of Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, particularly at the Tour. With a race with a result like this, on climbs like this, like, that is a good EOI for selection to the Tour for her. So on that, we had some listener questions, and one of them has kind of been wrapped into the discussion we've been having by one of our Discord members named Koppenberg. And I just want us to have a quick chat about it. Will the UCI's new rules requiring Women's World Tour participation in nearly all Women's World Tour events price some teams/sponsors out of the sport? Sarah Tizet and Roland are Women's World Tour on a budget. Is there enough deep-pocketed sponsors/teams to replace them? And then I guess we can also talk about the requirements for Women's World Tour, minimum requirements for Women's World Tour racing, so they can only miss, I think, one next year.
I think in the past that would have been, you know, not a good decision at all. And that's why they didn't bring that in like they have in the men's cycling. But I think we're coming into a phase now where you could say that pricing some teams or sponsors out of that level isn't a bad thing. Like, should Roland be a World Tour team anyway? That's, you know, something we've been debating for a few years, is teams like that where you're like, oh, should they have really qualified for that license? Do we need to have a few more barriers to entry now at that level? So it really distinguishes the top tier teams from the pro teams. And is that then going to help the calendar reshuffle itself?
The thing that pops to my mind immediately, I know this is a very Australian centric thing, but what this means for the Australian summer. So if it is that the World Tour teams can only miss one World Tour race, that means they have to come to Australia for either Cadell's race or for TDU. And for teams like SD Works that haven't come here in the past, they now have to, which, I mean, for them, it's not such a big deal. That the expense of that isn't such a big deal, but it does force them into a change that they haven't wanted to make. So assuming that's the way that it is, that it does play out, that's quite interesting and good for those races as well. It increases the quality of those start lists of those early season races. So that's interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about it previously with particularly the Aussie summer, with the like, if a team comes out for TDU, they may as well stay for Cadells. And then obviously with the Sun Tour now coming back, there's if you come out all this way, like, that's 2 or 3 races that you have to be here for. And then maybe you've got the option to miss a World Tour race later in the year if things do get really tight. I'm with Gracie on, like, I think we can start to price sponsors and teams out of the sport if they're not servicing their core business, so their riders. Like, are the riders on, like, teams like Roland really getting the benefit of a World Tour experience on that team? Like, I can't speak for their own experiences, but is it Yeah, I just always think about the well-being of the riders in this respect, and I just wonder if it is really the best interest of the riders to have this team still at World Tour standard.
I think where the UCI needs to be most helpful is making sure some of these teams or sponsors still exist if they're not World Tour. I think there's a lot of sponsors involved only because they've got that top contract. I think there's a few financial agreements in that a sponsor only wants to be part of women's cycling if that team has a World Tour license. So I think there needs to be I'm trying to think of a better way to say hand-holding for some of these sponsors to still see the benefit in staying involved in the sport, even if it's at that next level down.
Yeah, it's just seeing the benefit of the investment, going beyond just that team.
Does the fact that there is now a pro team category, does that provide more opportunities than if it was just stepping down to the continental level? Is there more prestige in that than there would have been beforehand?
Oh, for sure. I think so.
Yeah, because like those teams can be offered wildcard entries to World Tour races, and then that next key thing to solidify is a better pro calendar. So I think that we're getting there on that, but that's not quite there yet. So that's why there's still such a desire to have a World Tour license to guarantee that you've got a really good season of racing for your riders. But we can definitely create a good season of racing for pro riders if there's, a better restructure of the current calendar.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Koppenberg, if that is your real name, for that question. But we have another question by Lotta, and I haven't listened to the music part of this question yet, so we'll have to hold on to this until next week. Again, apologies. But this particular Discord user would like to hear the takes from both yourself, Matt, and Gracie on my piece in the newsletter on muscular women in the peloton and what strength work was going on during, Gracie, I guess, our times in the peloton, and / what would that look like?
I'm going way further back than you, Georgie. So when I was racing, pretty much from 2012 until I retired in 2020, I would always do strength work in the off season 2 to 3 times a week, generally 3 times a week, which completely smashed me. But when you're just doing a lot of base Ks, you can manage it. And then for a good half of my career, I probably would not have done it any throughout the season. So you really build in a huge amount of strength work in the off season while you're doing your base Ks, and then building into intensity into racing. And then once you hit Europe again, as an Aussie hitting Europe, but once you hit the season, pretty much would have ceased. That strength training would have included a bit of core flexibility yoga type of stuff. But in the second half of my career, I actually tried as hard as I could to be consistently doing it throughout the season, not as heavy and not as much, but at least once a week. Try to go for twice a week to the gym just to lift consistently. So I would, like I said, not super heavy, but just doing all of the functional movements, doing lots of core. And I felt like that really actually helped me, as long as you could manage your load in your training and your recovery as well. So I wouldn't do it on a rest day, for example, because you want to make sure your rest day is a rest day. And it's hard when you're tired from all the racing and all your training between the racing to also go to the gym. But, I made it appointments in my mind. So I would just show up and do it. And that helped me a lot.
Yeah, scheduling an appointments in that Google Calendar, which gave me anxiety when I saw your Google Calendar, Gracie. Everything that's going on in there. Since then, I have started my own Google Calendar. Haven't gotten into the color coding yet. My strength training has been a part of my life since I was 13. I was lifting 3 times a week as a rower. Very different in the cycling world, but my strength history in rowing certainly helped when I came across to cycling. And just anecdotally, I've seen a lot of evolution in the perception of strength training. There's a lot more strength-specific coaches within the cycling world now. Riders are seeing the benefits of it. A lot of teams will have strength coaches in their teams. And the focus is a lot on, so if you talk to picnic personnel riders, and they've got a very prescribed strength training plan, and they focus a lot on low reps, heavy weight, because it's very much getting that that neuromuscular pathway. So say you're doing like a heavy deadlift, it's like lifting really heavy and just like teaching your body that the load that it is coming. And there is like ample recovery between sessions. Of course, maybe you do it like twice a week, but there's also a lot of rest between the sets within the session itself. So the strength training philosophy, I feel like, has shifted to very heavy, low rep, instead of like I've spoken to people in the past who have done like, the high rep, low weight, just to try and get toned, kind of mentality. But this way, like, I mean, even anecdotally, not anecdotally, like my own experience, I felt like I benefited a lot in my sprint when I started to do that kind of work, because all of a sudden, like, I could just like switch into the sprint mode a lot quicker, and I was a lot more stable throughout my whole body. So my whole posterior chain was connected, which reminded me a lot more of rowing. So like in the rowing boat, you obviously connected through the handle all the way down towards the foot stretcher. So like make like your whole body then is the connecting force. So there was sprinting and rowing were quite similar in that respect. And then both the foundation was set in the weight room. So I feel like strength training is imperative now. Most people do it. And then obviously core training is a big one as well. But, I'm really happy to be getting, now that I'm out of the pro peloton, I can do a bit more vanity weight. So like, the bicep curls, the bench press, the tricep curls. Gracie's got a gym at her place, and I was loving myself sick in her garage.
Yeah, it's a good little setup. I'd love to, like, something else that Georgie and I were talking about over the weekend that we'd be keen to see, what training looked like for a top level female rider 10 years ago versus now, what training methodologies and I guess opinions have changed, because anecdotally feels like a lot has changed over that time.
There's a story in there, Gracie. So if there's any rider that has a Training Peaks file that would like to compare with Gracie Elvins from back in the day, we can write about it. Let me know. Joe, if you're listening, can I do this story?
I can't obviously weigh in on the strength training stuff, but I can give my perspective on something else you talked about in the piece, Georgie, and that was about the way we talk about female riders. And you talked about the way the media talks about female riders, and there's not much talk about muscular women in the peloton. And I think, from my point of view, and there's obviously a huge gender component to this, where as a man writing about women's cycling, it's a huge red flag, or it's a huge there's a huge red flag for me about any kind of description about physical appearance or anything close to that, and I'll try and avoid that wherever I can, just as a matter of course, basically. And I think that's kind of how it's handled generally. I think it's like, focus on the racing, focus on whatever. But it does create this dichotomy where we'll happily write about Jonathan Milan being an absolute beast on the bike, or Maz Pedersen being strong and muscular, whatever it is. But we avoid those, for the women, and regardless of how the women look, whether they're more muscular or more lean or whatever it might be. And it's a tricky one. And I think you're right. It would be good to be able to celebrate muscular women in that way, and to be able to write honestly about that and change a bit of the narrative around that. But it is tricky. And I think for me, there is that real block of like, I don't want to, it's just much easier for me to focus on the sport and the sporting aspect of it and not touch any of that.
Oh, and I can definitely appreciate that. I think I'm hoping but I feel like that's more of a societal expectation that we need to shift. And it's not just you that would shift it, it's everyone. But I think like Gracie and I went to the rugby on Saturday night, and watched the Brumbies win again, the semi-final now. They're off to New Zealand. But I was commenting on the fact that like, I was looking at these rugby players, and like I was thinking back to watching like the Olympics and stuff, and like even as athletes in cycling and rowing, we craft and we mold our bodies specifically and purposefully with intention to be tools in order to perform at the very best in our sport. So like personally, like I love that, to celebrate that, because there is so much work that goes into that. And as a consequence, like as a rugby player, you can take these absurd side steps and then sprint off at like a pace that's 10 seconds for 100 meters after multiple lateral movements with something circular in your hand. I don't know, it's all oval, ellipses. But I think there is something beautiful about that I think I'm hoping society will allow more freedom and commentary for that.
For sure.
All right. Well, now we have to hear me talk even more in this segment that we're doing.
Do you want me to time it? I'll time
You
it.
can time it, which is, How Good's Minute of Madness. And this one, we got listener submissions for this week, and there will be it happen every week. So if you've got something you want to hear me ramble on about for 60 seconds, chuck it in the Discord. But this week we're going to be discussing what we discussed briefly earlier, which is the new UCI rule, which fines riders for taking their hands off the bars in the closing meters of a race. So I can have a crack at being my verbose self. All right, Gracie.
When you're ready.
Just got to, I've got to do my vocal exercises.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Sport is now not fun. The officials are putting their fingers into these issues that needn't be changed. So a rider decelerating during a sprint and endangering other riders, knowingly staying within the line of other riders, such as celebrating in the bunch and talking on the radio, or taking hands off the handlebar while in a bunch. What utter cock! This is absolutely not. This is not part of cycling. Part of cycling is seeing your teammate win and celebrating. Cycling is optically a very individual sport for people who don't know cycling, and so these kinds of celebrations make it very much a team sport. The UCI are looking at something that needn't change. There is no regulation on corners before finish lines, maybe like 100 metres before the finish, as we saw in the Tour of Britain crit. They have no regulations on dangerous courses, which are intentionally designed for entertainment value, and yet they're like, oh, riders, be careful of the first 30 k's of this race, it's very dangerous. And there are no mandates of rider health in the UCI regulations. So I think the UCI need to look at where they're putting their energies and not into this. That's a minute.
Ding, ding. Oh, you're
Wow. Very close to a minute. Nailed it.
1.5 seconds over, but we'll allow it.
Yeah, it's all about practice. And I did swear, which my mom's going to be really mad about. Didn't see this podcast.
It was a good take. I think the argument about the fact that there's no regulations around other dangerous things is a good point. And you do see riders decelerating very quickly when there's a final corner, and we can see how much more dangerous that is when people are turning versus when they're going straight.
100%. And I think there's so many more low-hanging fruit that the UCI could pick, but they chose this. And I just don't really understand why. Like, as I said, it's like it is usually such an individual sport for the spectator when they're watching it. And when you see a teammate celebrating when their teammate wins, it all of a sudden say, oh, actually, no, I understand why they're celebrating, because they helped them. Like, there's a realization there, and it makes the sport less stoic. Like, I feel like cycling can be quite a stoic sport, so this actually injects some emotion. And I really I question the effect, the rationale behind it.
From Vollering's quote the other day, where she said, I understand the importance of these rules around safety. Do you think she thinks it's all a bit dumb as well? Or do you think she's like, no, that was a bit unsafe that I did that?
It's, what is it? It's like Free Britney, but this is like in cycling. And so Vollering has been freed and she's allowed to say whatever she wants. So 100%, I think she's being sarcastic.
I don't know. She comes across as a good girl to me. But yeah, I think, look, I understand that we need to find every way possible to make cycling safer.
Mm.
But this one, could we just say if it's just one hand, is that okay? Or
but Vollering only had one hand off the bar celebrating.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, that should be okay, but two hands, not okay. Or, like if you do crash a rider, then you should definitely be fined. Like, there should be a consequence if something happens, but I also do believe that preventative measures for crashing is also important. So yeah, like, I mostly agree that we should allow people to celebrate, and it looks great in photos. But, on the other hand, preventing crashes any way possible is also a good thing.
I think if you're going to play devil's advocate with the whole Vollering thing, you'd say that the fact she got fined 100 Swiss francs, lost 3 UCI points or whatever it was, and finished 58th in a bunch kick doesn't matter at all. Like, the fine doesn't matter to her at all. I think she'd probably do it again in a heartbeat. She's saying she won't, but like, it doesn't really matter that much to her. And I can't see a situation where that would have cost her the race. So, yeah, not a big deal for her.
Vollering, this is an investment. This fine is an investment in Vollering winning the Tour de France is my take on this. Because like her being so ecstatic at her teammate winning and like celebrating that her teammate has won.
Wasn't she celebrating her own win?
Oh, it could have been. But like let's just not take that out of it. Is like so she lost 100 Swiss francs now, but she's like, how much prize money is there going to be at the Tour de France, and how much like publicity endorsement deals are going to come out of that race? So I think she's more than happy to cop it.
Well, that's a good point, Matt. Say you cross the finish line somewhere within the top 20, but you've won GC and you raise your hands. Do you get fined?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
even if your teammate didn't win.
Look at Wollaston. She almost did that, except she just put into her headset.
I think so. I would have to check the exact wording, but I think if you're not the first rider across the line, if you're in the bunch and you're celebrating, I think then yes, you've breached the rules. So we have to clarify that. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
All right. So unless you guys have anything else you wanted to add this week, we'll finish up the cycling chat and. Next week, we've got Tour of Swiss, so we get to go into that. But we can discuss now obsessions for the week. Who wants to go first?
I can start. I've got an easy one. I'm obsessed with sleep at the moment, both in a good way and a bad way. Obsession in a good way and a bad way. Our 6-month-old has decided that sleep is overrated in the middle of the night. So long stretches in the middle of the night without sleep has made me very grateful for any opportunity I get to sleep, whether it's in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, whenever I can get it. The bad side of that obsession is I'm constantly thinking about sleep, and it's kind of taking over everything at the moment. And I'll be lying there trying to sleep and have flashbacks to babies crying, and it's been a whole thing. So very much obsessed with getting as much sleep as I can, and hope that obsession ends very soon.
Oh, God, I feel for you, Matt. That's why they use sleep deprivation as a form of torture. And when you're in the thick of it, you understand why. Yeah. I hope that it gets better for you.
Thanks.
My obsession is the weekend just passed because Georgie, as you've probably figured out, came to stay with me and my partner Kimbers. And we had lots of fun, went to the rugby and just hung out, watched some racing together, had some good food. My little boy Noah was obsessed with her, so that's his obsession this week. It was really sweet. And the best part was I got to take Georgie on 2 mountain bike rides, and that was heaps of fun for me, and I hope for her.
Yeah, it was. And Noah is an absolute gentleman. He's the happiest little bub. It was such a joy to hang out with him and see his personality. He's a very expressive baby. He is extremely quick on the bike. So I told Kimbers and Gracie that they're going to have to get some acreage to maintain his energy levels.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You can see him on like a little dirt bike, like zinging around.
Georgie, can you tell us what it was like trying to follow Gracie's wheel on the trails? Because for those that don't know, Gracie used to be a mountain bike pro before the road, so can obviously ride.
She didn't tell me that until we were like halfway up the mountain. But yeah, I guess we'll go on to I've got 2 obsessions this week. Great, a phenomenal weekend with Gracie and Kimbers and Noah. But yeah, mountain biking, my obsession. Honestly, didn't know cycling could be that fun. A whole new world opened up for me. And only been it once, which was great. On a track called Luge. So you can kind of understand I was riding all those berms. It was good. There was one stage where I managed to hold Gracie's wheel in like one track, and I felt very proud of myself. But I also had to remind myself that it was Aussie brakes and not Euro brakes. So I was like braking equally with both hands all the way down. When I got passed by 10-year-olds, it was fine. Like they were much cooler than I am anyway. So that was absolutely fine.
You did really well considering you haven't done much ever. So I was impressed.
And I like bought some of my rowing like long sleeves and stuff because I didn't want to like be uncool. I wanted to like have some baggy clothes. In the mountain. Oh
yeah, there's a whole another plethora of equipment that you can spend and waste your money on.
No, it's not wasting because the soak factor is so high. Yeah. And then my second obsession is actually something I just saw today, which is for the first time in 50 years, Psycho Killer by Talking Heads has a music video, which is sick. And it's starring Saoirse Ronan. So she was in Brooklyn, and for the movie Brooklyn, and directed by a guy called Mike Mills. And I just watched it and I was like, hell yeah, that's great. Because it's like, it's finding the violence in the banal. So it's not like about obviously like killing or like a psychopath or whatever. It's just someone who's like, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And she like slowly goes more and more mad. So it's like Mike Mills is like, I wanted to find the violence in the banality of everyday life of this woman.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an old classic. Why did they make a video clip all of this time later?
I think they had some like financial disputes with their recording label back 50 years ago. So, but they had some budget to do it 50 years later. And I love the song. I love the Talking Heads as well. So I'm big fan, and I love Saoirse Ronan. So that was a really good choice for casting in that video clip. I think. Recommend you go watch it.
Cool. We'll definitely go watch that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in for this week. We'll be back next week talking all things Tourist Swiss as we head closer and closer to the Giro della Donna. Matt, Gracie, thank you so much for joining us this week.